Hi friends, this is Dr. Srinivas, neurologist from Andhra Pradesh. Today I'll be talking about cognitive neurology and I'm going to clarify cognitive neurology. Cognitive neurology is both a joy and challenge because it needs a lot of concentration to understand it, but then it's really exciting. So today I'll be talking about cognitive neurology clarified. Actually, there are basically many important networks by which we can talk about all higher functions. The perisylvian network for speech, which I've already told in the last class. Now we have the paretofrontal network for spatial organization. We have occipitotemporal network for understanding and appreciating of the faces, visual orientation. Then we have limbic network for memory. Then we have the prefrontal network for behavior. The nature has beautifully divided the two important functions. The functions of the speech goes to the left cortex called as the dominant cortex, whereas the spatial orientation goes to the non-dominant cortex, that is right side. So persons who have right parietal lobe lesions usually will have left hemi-neglect. They can't see anything on the left side. Whereas patients with left parietal lobe lesions usually will not have right hemi-neglect. Why is this so? Just listen to me carefully. The right parietal lobe controls both the right and the left extrapersonal space, whereas the left parietal lobe controls only the right extrapersonal space, the contralateral. So, if the left parietal lobe is affected, the right extrapersonal space is gone, but this is compensated by the intact right parietal lobe, which controls both the right and the left extrapersonal space. And therefore, left parietal lobe lesions does not produce right hemi-neglect. Whereas if right parietal lobe is affected, both the right and the left extrapersonal space is affected, but the right is compensated by the intact left and there is no compensation on the left side. So the right parietal lobe lesions produce left hemi-neglect and usually left parietal lobe lesions does not produce right hemi-neglect. Very important point. So speech goes to the left side of the cortex and the spatial orientation goes to the right side of the cortex. So if the right parietal or non-dominant cortex is affected, person will have left hemi-neglect. So how do you test it clinically? You give them a clock and ask them to put all the 12 numbers. They'll put all the 12 numbers only the right side. They'll completely neglect the left side. So all the 12 numbers on the right side, they'll completely neglect the left side. If you ask them to wear the trouser, they'll wear it only on the right side, shirt only on the right side. And men, if they share the shirt only on the right side, they totally neglect on the left side. So much so that if you pinch their hand, they may ask, whose hand are you pinching at? Completely denial of the illness or the existence of one side of the body. You call that as anosognosia. So extreme form. So speech goes to the left cortex, the dominant cortex, spatial orientation goes to the right side of the cortex. We have another very interesting phenomenon again in the parietal lobe lesions, parieto-occipital lobe lesions, what we call as balance syndrome. It contains three components: oculomotor apraxia, a visual scanning of the environment; optic ataxia, reaching a target manually; and the most fascinating component is simultanagnosia, absence of which we call it as asimultanagnosia. What is a simultanagnosia? Suppose I look at some object. Not only do I look at the object, by the entire periphery also I look at it. So entire field comes into my vision, the entirety. I look at the entirety. But persons who have this parieto-occipital lobe lesions and asimultanagnosia When they look at an object, they fix their vision completely on that object, ignoring the periphery. They miss the forest for a tree. They completely focus on a particular object they cannot see in its entirety. I'll give you an example. You put big A's and small A's. Generally, if I ask anyone to encircle A's, obviously anyone can see the big A's, they'll encircle it. But in this person who's got asimultanagnosia, they do not understand the big letter A as A because their vision gets fixed on a particular object. So they either look at the horizontal line or the oblique line and they think it is not A. Whereas a small letter A will feel into their vision and they know it is A, they'll encircle it. So opposite of refractory error. Here persons are able to see the small A's well and encircle it, but not the big A's. This is asimultanagnosia. You ask them to come backwards so that the big letter A also comes into their focus of the vision, and then they can encircle it and they'll be able to see it. So balance syndrome, asimultanagnosia, optic ataxia, oculomotor apraxia. So these are all the important concepts of the paretofrontal lesions. Another very interesting aspect of the paretofrontal lesions is apraxia. What is apraxia? It is an inability to perform a learned motor act despite motor, sensory, coordination, comprehension being normal. Everything being normal but still not able to perform a known or learned motor act. There are many apraxias, but most important are ideational apraxia and ideomotor apraxia. These seem to be confusing, but let me explain to you with this the concept of parietal lobe and frontal lobe, and you will be able to understand it easier. You have the parietal lobe, you have the frontal lobe. Parietal lobe is responsible for planning of the movement. Suppose I want to take a pen and to write on a paper. So I imagine, I take a pen, put it on a paper and write. This planning and imagination is done by the parietal lobe. But given a real lifetime object of pen and writing it, with the actual real lifetime object, the execution of a movement is done by the frontal lobe. Very important concept. Parietal lobe is responsible for planning of a movement, whereas frontal lobe is responsible for the execution of the movement. So when the parietal lobe gets affected, the planning is lost. But since frontal lobe is intact, the execution is good. So this is known as ideomotor apraxia. Ask them to imagine and then do, they can't. Give him a cigarette and ask him to light. He may take this cigarette correctly and light it also correctly, smoke it out correctly. If it is affected, you call that as the ideomotor apraxia, where the planning is gone. So here, when you give a real lifetime object, they'll be able to perform, but when you ask them to imagine and then perform, they cannot. So here with the real lifetime object, they have no problem at all. So activities of daily living are not impaired. Whereas in ideational apraxia, the frontal lobe itself is affected. So the actual execution of the movements or the goal directed sequential movement, the sequence is gone. If you give them a real cigarette, ask them to smoke, they may take the cigarette correctly, but instead of lighting their cigarette, they may light the other person's cigarette. So the sequential, the goal directed actual performance of the movement is lost. So here the activities of daily living are impaired. So he himself volunteers and comes to the doctor saying that I am not able to perform activities of daily living. So ideomotor apraxia is a very common apraxia, fortunately, where the parietal lobe and its connections to the frontal lobe is affected. So planning is affected. He cannot imagine and do it, but when you give a real lifetime object, he can do it. So activities of daily living are not impaired. It is a doctor who picks it up. Whereas ideation apraxia, the frontal lobe per se is affected. So the execution of actual movements is affected. The sequence is affected. So goal directed movement is affected. This is ideational apraxia, where activities of daily living are impaired. Then you have other types of apraxia like constructional apraxia and dressing apraxia. These go to the non-dominant cortex. Whereas the ideational apraxia and ideomotor apraxia go to the dominant parietal lobe and its connections to the frontal lobe. Whereas constructional apraxia and dressing apraxia, more of spatial orientation, so they go into the non-dominant cortex. Fine. Right. Now we'll go to the next part, the occipitotemporal network. As I said, the occipital lobe is concerned with vision. You have agnosia, visual agnosias. What is agnosia? Agnosia is inability to appreciate a particular sense despite the peripheral sensory organ being intact. Example, my eyes are intact, still I am not able to appreciate vision. That means occipital lobe is affected. This is visual agnosia. My auditory apparatus is intact, but still I am not able to appreciate the hearing. The sense of hearing is gone. The temporal lobe is gone. This is auditory agnosias. So agnosia, the peripheral sensory organ is intact, but despite that, person is not able to appreciate this sensation. So when the ophthalmic apparatus or the orbit is intact, still if the person is not able to appreciate vision, you call that as visual agnosias. In visual agnosias, again there are two important components: aperceptive agnosias and associative agnosias. The parieto-occipital lobe, as I said, spatial parietal lobe, is concerned with where. Occipitotemporal lobe is concerned with what. So when the parieto-occipital connections are gone, where is gone, so they cannot identify an object. So that is parieto-occipital connections getting affected. Where is gone, it is known as apperceptive agnosias. Then you have associative agnosias. Associative agnosias means occipitotemporal network is gone. Occipitotemporal means what is gone. So they can identify a particular object, but they cannot give meaning to that object. Classic example is prosopagnosia, where the fusiform gyrus is affected. They can identify a face as a face. They can identify in fact a face as a human face, but they cannot give the identity of the individual. So they can identify, but they cannot give meaning to that particular object. That is known as associative agnosias. I don't know whether you have realized this or not. Very, very fascinating. The topic I'm going to talk about, alexia without agraphia. But before I dwell into this topic, I need to talk a very important basic concept. I am right-handed. Fine. My speech areas are on the left side. Fine. And if I look at an object, because of the crossing over of visual fibers, whatever object I look at, it will go into the opposite occipital cortex. Suppose I look at the right side of my body, it goes into my left occipital cortex. Suppose I look at the left side, it goes into my right occipital cortex. If you understand this, alexia without agraphia is very, very easy to understand. So whenever I look at the right side, it goes to my left occipital cortex. Whenever I look at the left side, it goes to my right occipital cortex. Fine. Now, whatever I look at, I would like to convert it into a language form. So when I want to convert that into a language form, I need to access my language areas. For example, I am looking on the right side. I am looking at a plant. I want to say that plant is really looking good. I want to convert the vision into language form. So what happens? When I look at the right side at the plant, it goes into my left occipital cortex. My language areas are also on the left side, so it is easy to access the language areas which is on the same side, and therefore it is easy for me to convert it into a language form. Yes, the plants are looking good. But imagine I am looking at a doll on the left side, and I want to say the doll is looking good now. So when I look at the doll on the left side, it goes into my right occipital cortex. But then my speech areas are not on the right side, it is on the left side. So it has to cross the corpus callosum, go into the language areas which are on the left side. So it takes slightly longer time. So anything on the right to convert it to a language form is easy. I don't need a corpus callosum. But anything I look on the left to convert it to a language form, I need corpus callosum to transfer the information from the right occipital cortex and to the language areas which are on the left. So having understood this, now it is easy to understand alexia without agraphia. What is alexia without agraphia? Alexia means difficulty in reading. Agraphia means difficulty in writing. So alexia without agraphia. Without agraphia, they have no problem in writing, but they can't read what they have just written. So alexia without agraphia. Why they have problem with reading? So imagine as a posterior cerebral artery infarct, PCA. So posterior cerebral artery supplies the occipital lobe as well as the sphenium of the corpus callosum. So if there's a PCA infarct, especially if the left PCA infarct, what happens? The occipital cortex is affected. So I have to use only my right occipital cortex. But if the splenium of the corpus callosum is also affected, I can't transfer the information from right occipital cortex to the language areas. One, my left occipital cortex is affected because of the PCA infarct. Second, the splenium of the corpus callosum is also affected, so I can't transfer information from my right occipital cortex to the left side. And therefore, I can't read alexia. But I don't have a problem with. So, if left occipital cortex is affected, the information cannot come from the right side. Anything has to come from my right occipital cortex, but since splenium of the corpus callosum is affected, they cannot transfer the information, so they have difficulty in reading. So this is alexia without agraphia. They don't have any problem in writing because it goes slightly anterior. So whatever they've written, they can't read what they've just written with their own handwriting. That is alexia without agraphia. Now limbic network for memory. Memory, basically you have the limbic system, the medial part of the temporal lobe. Memory and emotions they go together. Memory, you have immediate memory, recent memory, long-term memory. For immediate memory, you give 7-digit forwards and only 5-digit backwards. For recent memory, you give 3 unrelated articles, ask them to repeat after 5 minutes. Long-term memory, childhood memories. The immediate memory goes to the frontal lobe, the recent and long-term memory goes to the temporal lobe. And that's why if there is the medial part of the frontal lobe, if it gets involved, like NPH, normal pressure hydrocephalus, you have dementia because the memory goes to the frontal lobe. So they have dementia, they have incontinence of the urine because the bladder area is there, the leg area is there, so they have gait apraxia. So immediate memory goes to the frontal lobe, the recent and long-term memory goes to the temporal lobe. Another way of classifying memory is explicit memory and implicit memory. Explicit memory is pertaining to the memory where you need a conscious retrieval for it. Implicit memory, you don't need a conscious retrieval for it. It becomes automatic. Example for implicit memory is the procedural memory. You don't need a conscious retrieval for it. Just because you're born as a human being, at a later point of time, say 2 years down the line, you know how to walk, you know how to talk, but then how to drive a car, how to ride a bike, how to swim. These are all known as procedural memory. They are not inborn. You put in a lot of effort and then master the skill, master the procedure. You call that as procedural memory. The best part of it is that it becomes automatic. You don't need a conscious retrieval of it. For example, if I throw someone who knows swimming, he does not think I have to use my right hand or left hand. He swims and comes automatically. That is procedural memory, otherwise known as implicit memory. Explicit memory, you need a conscious retrieval for it. For example, you have, again there are two types. One is semantic memory, pertaining to facts. You must have learned a lot of things. The fund of knowledge is semantic memory. Episodic memory pertains to episodes. For example, 2 years back you might have gone to Ooty, or 3 years back you might have gone to Kodaikanal. The episodes you remember it. That is episodic memory. And the fund of knowledge is semantic memory. These are explicit memory. You need a conscious retrieval. You have to think and get the information back. So you need conscious retrieval for it. That's why it's known as explicit memory. Implicit memory becomes a part of your body system. You don't need a consciousness for retrieving the information. It becomes automatic. Classic example is procedure memory, driving the car. It becomes automatic. You drive the car, you just look there, you look here, and you drive it automatically. That is procedural memory. And finally, we have the prefrontal network. As I said in my earlier classes, the frontal lobe is well developed, especially the prefrontal lobe as compared to other animals, because humans are placed higher in the hierarchy. We are very intelligent, we speak, we use the fingers very well, manual dexterity, we have lot of foresight. Our behavior also depends on frontal lobe. For example, I'll give a classic example. Suppose my professor slaps me for a mistake I've committed. If my frontal lobe is intact, what do? I think, oh my God, he has slapped him, but then he's going to be my external examiner. So I need to be very polite to him. I'll be quiet. I have foresight. I know that he's going to be my examiner. But if that foresight is lost, if the frontal lobe is gone, the professor slaps, I'll slap him back immediately. I don't have the foresight. So this foresight, intelligence, abstract thinking, behavior, everything lies in the frontal lobe. In fact, the frontal lobe determines the human personality. So this is an overview of all the cognitive functions which I try to clarify. As I said in the beginning of the lecture, it's both a joy and challenge to understand all these beautiful cognitive functions. I hope I've made it clear. You've been a wonderful audience, and again we'll meet in the next class with a new topic. Thank you.